been very open about the fact that I've stopped drinking, and I've reined myself in with that quite a lot.
So you don't drink at all?
No, I don't drink at all now.
Okay.
When Nigel Farage calls you and tells you he thinks you're drinking too much, then you realise you've probably got a bit of a problem. I went to a Wetherspoons in Merthyr Tydfil at midday and just shouted around this Wetherspoons, is anyone here voting Labour?
Yeah.
And then one guy who was having his breakfast or brunch or whatever was like, I won't do the Welsh accent. He was like, yeah, I'm voting Labour. I was like, well, can you just come outside and talk to me for a few minutes about why?
How do you feel about so-called citizen journalists? I think it's dangerous. I do think it's dangerous because they're not real journalists. They're not trained in any way. We don't just see a headline somewhere else and then write a story about it and say, yeah, well, they said it, so it's true. Is GB News racist? Is GB News balanced?
Okay, I see.
On today's Daily Expresso, we're joined by a man who has made a career out of being loudly, proudly, and sometimes controversially British. Patrick Christys is one of GB News' most recognisable presenters. He's a broadcaster, a commentator, a dad, and depending on who you ask, a much-needed voice of common sense. I think you thought I was going to say something else then, didn't you, Patrick?
I did, but I'm glad it was that. Yeah.
Welcome to the Daily Expresso, my man.
you.
You've recently become a father?
Yes.
For the first time?
For the first time?
First time you know of.
All right.
How has it changed your politics?
How's it changed politics? Well, I'm not sure it's changed my politics. If anything, I think it's made me possibly a little... It's made me examine things myself, and I think so far... where I've come to is that I've got more conviction in what I'm saying, because I know this, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, because there are loads of people out there who would love to have children and for whatever reason don't or can't. And I am not saying that, people who do have kids have a more of a stake in society than those who don't. I'm not trying to say that, but I hope people take this the right way, because I don't know how to articulate it, but you do kind of, I think, feel a little bit once you've got a little one that you're raising through society, that you've got a bit, if things matter a bit more, maybe. Yeah. I hope that comes across right for people. But so it's made me think about, what kind of things do I really want him to be taught in school? What kind of things would I rather, maybe, I would rather deal with in the home, maybe. How safe is society? Yeah. What future opportunity is there for him? When I think about when I was growing up, safety with things like phone devices and all of that. Like when I was growing up, I think I was the kind of maybe the back end of when I had video games when I was younger. They were obviously fake. It was things like Pokemon or whatever. There was no distortion of reality there. Yeah. Whereas now you see some of the games that are there, and I'm like, how do they tell the difference between real life? Yeah. And okay, so you're starting to have these conversations now about access to the internet. Again, I can remember dial-up when I was like 13 or 14. It was pretty basic stuff, wasn't it? Whereas now, conceivably, he's going to have access to everything at the touch of a button. So, yeah, I don't know if it's changed my politics as such, but it's allowed me to look at things through a slightly different lens. And yeah, it's unlocked several new fears that I didn't have before.
Are you less tolerant of now? So certainly as soon as I had my kid, instantly I was like, I don't want to walk down this street. This street looks a little bit dodgy. I don't want to walk down there. I don't want my wife to go down to this part of the town anymore because I don't want her getting hurt. I don't want my son to be going to to this football club because there's some parents who are in that football club who are wrong and I became less. I didn't want to negotiate and tolerate people anymore. It's a case of no, this is exactly what I want to protect the family.
So. There are things. So Emily, bless her, is my wife.
Emily Carver, brilliant. You are punching.
Massively.
Put it in the comments. Let us know.
Massively,
if you think Patrick is punching.
100%. I'll answer that for you. Right, I am. One day she'll come to her senses. But so she's very, very good at wanting to continue to kind of live her life. So she'll do things like taking to baby yoga or whatever, which, as far as I can tell, the babies don't do any yoga. They just lie there, and the mums. I'm not even convinced about how much yoga the mums do. I think maybe they have a coffee and sort of moan about their husbands. But anyway, so sometimes that will involve her obviously walking there on her own, or even things like if I'm working from home a little bit in the day. Before I go into the office, she's like, "Oh, I'll take him around the park." I'm like, "No, I'll come with you." Yeah. And I have to balance about how much of that is just the natural protective instinct, how much of that is because of how unsafe parts of London are. Yeah. I think it's probably a bit of both there. I find myself, looking around when we were pushing the pram, you're spotting, aren't you? Who's dodgy? Who's the nutter that's gonna do things? And there are quite. there've been quite depressing aspects of it. We're looking at nurseries just for the future, and there's one really lovely little nursery near us that because of the geography of London, you don't have a lot of outdoor space at these places.
Yeah.
So they would have to take the children to like a public park.
Right.
So you end up putting you would end up putting all of your trust in a very well-meaning nursery worker to look at, or a few of them to look after, say 20 or 30 kids, and then in a public park, and then you're thinking like, am I going to get that horrendous phone call one day that one lunatic in that park, has done something unspeakable? But then you're like, can you live your life like that? It's the worst case scenario thinking, isn't it? But I suppose it's that natural protective instinct. It's scary. Look, it is scary. It is a scary thing, because you don't want to, you don't want any decisions that you make as a parent. I don't want to look back at it and be like, well, were we a bit too cavalier about this? And then that's cost us big time.
Yeah.
So it is scary, but I'm only 3 months into it. You have to have these conversations with your family and your wider family, and we're very, very lucky that we've got a great wider family. My parents, my grandma Emily's parents, and her siblings as well. We can have these kind of conversations and come to decisions as a family, which is great. But yeah, it's opened up a whole new way of thinking about stuff.
How important is your health now? Do you take your health more seriously now you've got a kid?
I thought I would, but it's kind of gone the other way. I mean, it feels as though you've got more to live for. I mean, for me, I've always kind of fluctuated a bit with my weight and things like that. I've been very open about the fact that I've stopped drinking, and I've reined myself in with that quite a lot.
So you don't drink at all?
No, I don't drink at all now.
Okay.
Was
it Nigel Farage who inspired you to? Is that what I heard?
Well, it was one of the reasons.
I think. How did that happen? Because Farage is a big drinker.
Yeah.
Notoriously.
Well, when Nigel Farage calls you and tells you he thinks you're drinking too much, then you realise you've probably got a bit of a problem. So there was that. But I mean, look, the writing was on the wall there for me for quite a long time, if I'm being really honest with you. And I had to go and take myself off to rehab. I've been very open about this, and I had tremendous support again from my now wife Emily and my family and everything. So I just had to get well, really, and that is something that I do have to work at. And I don't want to take my eye off the ball with it, because you don't want to slip back into anything like that. But it just get a bit easier over time. You put things in place that you can deal with that, and I go to meetings, and I've got a sponsor, and got a good group of people around me. So I take that very
wonderful.
seriously.
That's great, man.
I mean, I have to take that very seriously. I don't have a choice when it comes to that stuff. But yeah. So from that perspective, and I do think, and I have thought as well, since having little George, like the idea for me of turning up back at home, having had a skinful, and he's up in the middle of the night, and me not being able to look after him or be there for Emily, or spending days recovering from that and stuff.
Yeah.
That actually is a really good thing. Trying to play the tape forward, like, all right, if I ever do think, I could quite like to have a little drink here or something like that.
Yeah.
Trying to play that tape forward and be like, well, what does that look like? It looks like me coming home in this state, being out of action for that length of time. What if that's the day where, God forbid, something happens and I can't drive him to the hospital?
Yeah.
That stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm finding that in that way, he's helping me. Actually, he doesn't know it, obviously, but he's helping me. So yeah. But I mean, the things like, for a while after I'd given up the booze, I was like, well, the one thing I've got left, I can smoke. But I'm gonna have to cut down on that. I don't want to be the wheezy dad trying to chase him around a park as he's kicking a ball around, and they're like, just give me a minute. Just give me a minute. It's been the thing that's the most difficult for us at the moment is the hours that I'm on air now is 9 p.m. until midnight, and it's 5 nights a week. It's an audience show on a Friday night, and that does take a bit of a toll. I love what I do. It's an I am immensely grateful for GB News. I'm not just saying this. I'm immensely grateful to GB News for giving me the opportunity, for sticking with me, and for putting so much faith in me and letting me do all this stuff. I am not for one second complaining about the hours that I work, but it is quite all consuming, because you might come on air at 9 p.m. but really you've had to you're thinking about what topics you're going to do from the second you wake up. Quite often, you'll know what it's like with breaking news. You shred the whole thing at 8 p.m. You start again, and it's 5 nights a week, and then at the weekends you try to recover a bit. I don't sleep when I come back because I'm quite wide after my show, and then I don't like to eat a lot before my show because I'm a bit lethargic. So I'm eating like dinner at 1 a.m. and a couple of hours let that go down. Before you know it, it's 3:30. And then you're trying to keep playing. You're chasing your tail. So one of the big issues at the moment is just us trying to get into that routine where I can get enough sleep. Emily's not left on her own looking after him too much in the night, which at the moment she is, and I would like to take this opportunity to very much apologise to her for that because I'm yet to get this balance right. And then me trying to help out a bit in the day and all that. So, but that's just good. We'll get there. We're 3 months in, and that's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. We'll get there.
Wonderful. Right, let's talk about GB News.
Yes.
First 2 questions. Is GB News racist? Is GB News balanced?
Okay, I see. Well, no, we're not racist. And, I think that we talk about a huge amount of very controversial issues that for a lot of people in the establishment media class are deemed controversial, but for a lot of the ordinary men and women that are out there in the public are not controversial. So we're not afraid to broach those topics. I mean, a good example of this would be that there was a recent academic report that came out, and it was published by a theologian, and it was actually ultimately published by a group called Christian Concern. And what that did, and I found it fascinating, was in relation to the grooming gangs. What that did was analyse aspects of more fundamentalist Islamic teachings, which not every single Muslim in the country subscribes to, by the way, at all, but some people do, more fundamentalist ones, especially more of the recent immigrants from parts of like rural Pakistan, where that kind of Muslim teaching is just pretty common. And look at aspects of that and what their views are religious-wise and what the link could be from that to the way that they've treated predominantly working-class, vulnerable white girls in this country. And there are aspects of that, male dominance over women, the way that you could treat non-believers, for example. So we had the guts to talk about that report. And a lot of other news outlets, in fact, I think every other news outlet didn't want to touch it because you've got that, is that going to be Islamophobic? Well, I don't think it's Islamophobic. Have a conversation. And the way that I did that on my show was I basically read out aspects of the report. We had a chat about it. I interviewed a Muslim person off the back of it straight away. We had a panel discussion off it. I said things like I've just said to you now, which is that this by no means applies to every single Muslim in the UK. So I don't think anyone could really say that there's anything racist there. And I personally, I'm usually I like to think anyway, careful to talk about things like cultural issues, cultural norms, as opposed to it's like the colour of people's skin. I think that would be racist just to say that. So that for me is a big distinction.
Is GB News obsessed with Muslims and Islam? Like last year, the report said that nearly 50% of all mentions in UK news channels came from GB News.
Yeah, well, that was a really interesting report because that was done by the Centre for Media Monitoring, which actually it turns out was an offshoot of the Muslim Council of Britain. And in that report, they misquoted me loads of times. In fact, at one point, they had to apologise because they just made up they put it in their actual layout of their report. They blew this quote up.
What was the quote? I hate Muslims.
It wasn't far off. It was something like that. And then they had a date on it. And I was like, firstly, well, I'm almost absolutely certain I've never said that anyway. And then secondly, I was like, when is it? And I wasn't even in the country at the time. So we went back to them and we were like, where have you got this from? And they were like, sorry. What was fascinating about that report was that they included times we'd spoken about Muslims to include things like actual terrorist attacks, the grooming gangs stuff that had happened, things like, when there was at the last election, when there was obviously, the kind of the rise of the independent, the kind of Gaza independent, things to do with Hamas, right? Now, I would always thought if I was just, a normal Muslim person, we're always told, aren't we? Like, well, don't bracket those things in with the religion of Islam. But that report did. And they were like, well, every single... So I was like, well, me talking about, like, an actual terror attack that's happened here, I'm not talking about Muslims. I'm talking about... There's one bloke who is, an Islamist terrorist or whatever, and they've bracketed all that in about all the times that we've spoken about Muslims. So we pushed back on that, and it fell apart. And then the other thing I would say about that is... is that there are a couple of people who put their names to that report who are kind of white, lovey, middle/upper middle class, Ofcom, ITM, BBC types, who I went back to them once we'd managed to pick this report apart, and it became obvious to me in their communications that they'd not bothered to read that report but been willing to write the foreword to it, basically saying that we were, I think, like an engine of Islamophobia, which let's be honest, can have a habit of putting a target on some people's backs.
Yeah.
In my view, and it's just my opinion, they were perfectly happy to put a target on my back and other GB News presenters' backs so that they could go around the dinner party circuit in North London and saying, oh, look, we've really stuck it to GB News for being Islamophobic, having not bothered to read the full report or fact-check that full report. And when they were willing to criticise GB News' journalism as part of this, that was pretty shoddy journalism from their part, actually. And it's almost like they were everything that they accused us of being. The other aspect that you mentioned there about GB News being balanced, so we have to jump through quite a lot of hoops in order to be balanced. And one thing I would like to raise as well is often how difficult it is to get some Labour voices on. So again, recently, we I don't know when this is going out, but at the time of recording, a few days ago, I was in Merthyr Tydfil in Wales, this big Labour constituency.
Yeah.
And we told the Labour MP for the area that we were coming about 3 weeks in advance.
Yeah.
And we were going to do a show from a working man's club that evening. He is a member of that working man's club. And we'd said, look, it would be lovely to talk to you because the polls indicate this seat's going to go reform. It's an interesting case study. This is why we're here. They never got back to us, as far as I'm aware. They didn't turn up. They didn't send anyone to turn up. He didn't even bother to call around 20 of his mates, which must exist in this traditional Labour area, to come and turn up to the working man's club and put their side of it up. Didn't even bother to do any of that stuff. So then what culminated in that? So in order for me to get balance on that show, I had to go and try and find Labour voters. And we were joking about this off air, but I'll say it now. I went to a Wetherspoons in Merthyr Tydfil at midday and just shouted around this Wetherspoons, is anyone here voting Labour?
Yeah.
And then one guy who was having his breakfast or brunch or whatever was like, I won't do the Welsh accent. He was like, yeah, I'm voting Labour. I was like, well, can you just come outside and talk to me for a few minutes about why? And he did, bless him. He came out and he was like, quite likes Keir Starmer. He thinks that people like me misrepresent him and that he's actually a nice guy and all this. Brilliant. Didn't push back on him at all, really. Just let him say his thing. And then we put that out. But that's an example of us having to jump through some quite extreme hoops in order to get some balance onto a show, when really the easy thing would have been for the Labour MP to have called us and gone, yeah, we'll do an interview with you. It is tricky. It can be a bit tricky in that sense. But they are, the other aspect, sorry, just quickly on this, is they're doing, on big days like the budget day, Labour are still ignoring us, our political correspondent, our political editor.
Chopper, yes.
Chopper, he's like the most mild-mannered bloke in the world, right?
He lost it. He was angry.
But rightly so, it takes a lot to push him to that end.
So Rachel Reeves refused to answer a question from Chopper, right?
Yeah, we've had, and that came off the back of, I think, David Lammy doing something similar recently, and a few other examples, big news events where they'd refused to take questions from GB News. And the wider context of that is that, firstly, Christopher Hope is a really nice guy.
He is.
Right? And that he's incredibly balanced. I don't really know what his politics are, and I work with this guy, very closely and all of that. So, the idea that Chopper's going to give you a biased interview is ridiculous, right? And GB News had come off the back of 5 months of being the most viewed news channel, so being Sky News and then the BBC News channel, pretty much every day for 5 months. So we've got a big audience there. And I think that was just incredibly disrespectful. I think that's one of the things that wound Chris up a bit, was that it was really quite disrespectful towards him, but also to our viewers, of which now there are more than at Sky and BBC News.
But isn't it their prerogative to say who they want to take questions from?
Of course it is.
We see Trump do it all the time.
Look,
he won't take questions from the fake news networks.
Yeah. I mean, but it's ultimately it's their right. But I think we still have a right to feel as though that's quite disrespectful, and it's disrespectful to our viewers. I think the thing that I feel personally about GB News is that I think we have a much deeper connection with our viewership than Sky and BBC News. I think we're much more intertwined with the viewers, and we've really worked hard to kind of foster that relationship. And when people stop a lot of the presenters in the street and say hello and all of that.
Yeah.
I think they already feel like they really know you. We've got that personal connection with them. So I think we feel it as presenters or as political editors or whatever. We feel it very deeply when it feels to us as though politicians are disrespecting our audience by refusing to engage with them.
Yeah.
So I think we felt quite offended by that. Really.
How do you react to people saying GB News is just reform TV, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I personally would push back on that massively.
Shocker.
I mean, yeah. But if you look at the broadcasting throughout the course of the day, I mean, Eamon Holmes and Ellie Costello in the morning, that's just, it's quite nice, lovely TV. And again, by the way, can I just say, there's a lot of these politicians that are willing to go and get absolutely skewered by Nick Ferrari every single morning on LBC. And very often it's literally for the most basic question, like, how much does this cost?
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't know. I don't know. And he's like, do you know when this is starting? Oh, you're asking me all the tough questions here, Nick. Whereas, actually, and I hope they don't mind me saying this, Eamon has got the idea that when they're on to talk about something specific, which might be like, I don't know, new computers for primary schools or something, that really you should do those people the respect that whatever Labour minister has come on, or Tory shadow minister, whatever it is, you should do them the respect of leading the interview with that. And then obviously it flows on from other things. Other outlets don't do that. No. So the idea that they would get a rougher ride on GB News Breakfast, I find ridiculous. So you look at that, I mean, I don't think we're reform TV at all. We go through a lot of efforts to try and get a lot of balance on there. And Nigel Farage, for example, which I think is probably the leading aspect to that question. Look, I mean, he has had a show on LBC previously. Loads of other people would absolutely love to have Nigel presenting on their things because he gets great ratings, because he wins awards like the Trick Award, etc. And it's a question of personal choice, isn't it? If people don't want to watch him, then they don't have to. No one's holding a gun to anyone's head to do it. So, look, I think we have a range of people on with a range of views, and that's the way I would look at it.
How do you feel about so-called citizen journalists? How do you feel about that? Like, I think it's dangerous. I do think it's dangerous because they're not real journalists. They're not trained in any way. Tommy Robinson commenting about Guadeloupe.
Yeah.
He went onto X and said, there's been a car attack at a Christmas market. Someone's driven the car into them. 10 people dead. Yada, yada. Making it sound like it's some kind of terrorism incident. It then transpired that actually no one was killed. Not one person was killed, and it was a drunk driver. It wasn't terror related at all. Right. And then he came out afterwards and he said, "Oh, actually, I got this news from Indian Express or something." And he's like, "Well, that's not how journalists operate. We don't just see a headline somewhere else and then write a story about it and say, yeah, well, they said it, so it's true." That's what I think is dangerous about citizen journalists.
So there's different kinds of citizen journalists for me. One of the things that I really lament is the death of the local press, right? So I think I was very lucky when I was first starting out. I went to a great local paper, the Westmoreland Gazette in Cumbria, a huge patch, geographically huge. And I had some very good old school editors that would make me go to things like town planning meetings. Yeah. Where sometimes you're sitting there and you're like, shoot me now. Yeah. But actually, then the odd thing would pop up and you'd get a great story out of it because you'd realise that something was going on. Someone had submitted this planning application for something mad. And so you get these things. Well, now there's been huge cutbacks in local press. Yeah. That's dying out a lot of the time. And so you end up with people feeling as though like local politicians or local events are either being missed or people aren't being held to account. And what rises from the ashes there is people who think, well, I'll do it myself then. Yeah. And like you say, a lot of these people are not maybe trained or they don't necessarily know things, certainly when it comes to things like contempt of court law. Yeah. And you can end up with problems there. And people going around filming various different things. So that it can have negatives. It can have negatives, and there can be things where people get the wrong end of the stick, and they amplify something that is just fake news that could have real world consequences. Yeah. There's aspects to that as well, though. I mean, by the way, Hope Not Hate are not immune to this. I mean, there was the infamous thing that they put out about, or one of them put out about how at the height of the summer disorder after the Southport massacre, that there was Muslim women being attacked with battery acid somewhere, and that just was not true. So it can work on both sides. But what I will say though is that I I have had quite a lot of joy out of certain, what you might call citizen journalists, because a lot of them have got their ear to the ground in their local area, and I have been sent some unbelievable scoops by them.
Yeah.
But then the onus is on me and our team and our legal team to go and check, make sure, right, okay, hang on a minute, what date is that video actually?
Yeah.
So we then do the hard work of making sure this is legally sound. So I think they're great for tip-offs. I do value a lot of what they do, but there are some of those downsides, which is that, you know, sometimes if they get something wrong, you know, that can have negatives.
Yeah. Well, speaking of going back to Farage, what do you make of the constant attacks he's getting now? So, a couple of weeks ago it was his old school friends. I guess you can't even call them school friends, because they said he was racist to them. Yeah. And now it's election fraud and spending or whatever.
Yeah.
What should we forgive him for things he said as a teen?
This is a really fascinating topic. So some of the rumours about Nigel Farage's time at school actually surfaced years ago. Michael Crick was the journalist who put some of this stuff out there, and then that all went very quiet. And some of it I think is probably a little bit ridiculous. Like I think you say what you like about Nigel Farage. I don't imagine he did ever walk through a town singing Hitler Youth songs. I mean that seems a little bit, but you know,
even in the core,
even she said,
Nigel Farage is not a racist.
Yeah, right. So there's that. So a couple of the aspects with this is that sometimes the traditional thing to accuse Nigel Farage of racism seems to have come from the angle of Islamophobia. I don't think anyone really thinks that he's an anti-Semite.
Okay,
right? That would be my take on it.
Yeah,
and I certainly, in the wake of some of these new reports coming out, say I've had quite a few people from the Jewish community who've messaged me to say that they just don't think that, you know, they don't really think he's an anti-Semite. They don't really think this stacks up. And if you look at one of the major defections to reform in the middle of all of this is a bloke called Alan Mendoza, who is a very prominent member of the Jewish community, who was at the Henry Jackson Society. So, you know, would he have gone so public about joining reform while this was happening if he, or presumably a lot of the people that like he goes to synagogue with, really thought that no one's anti-Semite? I suspect not. So I think there's that. There is that wider question, isn't there now, of... So this was what, how many years ago? 50 years ago,
yeah.
Something. There is that wider question of, do you have to let go things that people may or may not have said at school? And I was thinking about this on the way up. Now, I went to a very multicultural school. It had a large Jewish population. It had quite a sizable Muslim population, Hindus, quite a lot of black people as well. Majority white. And I can remember, I mean, the thing is, I don't want to say this, because all of a sudden I don't get in trouble with this, but I can remember things like when you're playing football in the playground at lunchtime, and there'd be certain times where, like, I don't know, I don't think anyone, it was quite an organic thing, and it'd be like, right, who's playing against who? And sometimes it'd be like, right, like
whites
Jews,
versus blacks.
but it's like, but
Jews versus Hindus.
But no one was like saying, like, it was like, that was just like a group thing, and it was like, and no one really thought about that. But then you talk about it now, and you're like, flipping it, that was but there wasn't any racism involved in that. And everyone was completely complicit in it. No, there wasn't like one Nigel Farage type ringleader that was like we need apartheid in this playground now. So I think people have to make their own minds up about how seriously they take that.
Because Nigel hasn't really come out and said he didn't say those things. He hasn't been clear in saying that. So let's presume he did say it, and people would say, well, it was when he was a teenager. We all say stupid things when we're kids. Then I would say, okay, fine. Shamima Begum was a teenager when she went and joined ISIS. She should be brought back to the country now.
It's a slight difference there, isn't it? There was sewing suicide bombers into their vests and, playing football with severed heads. It's probably slightly more extreme, I think, than some of the Nigel Farage stuff. But
kids are kids. Kids are kids, Like she was. I think she was groomed. I think she was misled. and she is our problem. She's British.
Well, then should 16-year-olds have the vote? You see, because
no, I don't think they should.
Well, right. Well,
I don't
right.
think they should.
But this is it. But the problem there on the with a lot of people who think that Shamima Begum, and obviously not you, but a lot of people that think Shamima Begum was groomed and was a child and was incapable of making her own decisions, struggle to answer the question, well, in 6 months' time, you'd have given her the vote at 16. So if she's informed enough to be able to democratically decide who runs a country, can you also simultaneously claim that she was not capable of knowing that the Islamic State terrorist cult was wrong? So yeah, I mean, I'm pretty hardline when it comes to Shamima personally. I know we disagree. I know we disagree on this, but again, that's fair enough. I can understand why people think that she's our problem, and that she should come back and maybe we monitor a bit, and maybe she's learned a lesson, or whatever. I just come to a different view on that. I just think there are some things that are so awful that you should face consequences for them that do last forever. And that if she wants to be reunited with her family, and her family also are desperate to be reunited with her, then maybe there is the potential to do that in a different country. But that's a question for them, obviously. But yeah, that will be my view on that. Anyway.
Right, last question for you, Patrick. Right. How do you feel about this whole raising the flag movement? Because initially, I genuinely didn't care when I used to see the flags up. I wasn't affected. I wasn't one of those people who said, "Oh, I feel intimidated by it." I really didn't care. I didn't like people painting on roundabouts and stuff because that's public property. Keep it your front yard if you wish to. But more and more recently, I'm seeing videos of people, white people, saying, "Actually, I don't want you to put the flags in my street," and they're being intimidated by the men who are going around putting the flags up, which I don't agree with at all.
Okay. Yeah, so, I mean, for me, it very much depends on why they're doing it. Mm-hmm. So, I think that the majority of people who are putting the flags up, so, and by the way, it's happening in Scotland, it's happening in Wales, happening, across the UK. I think the majority of people are doing it. It's a reaction to the fact that they feel as though that they have been let down, that Britain maybe has not been the number one priority for our political leaders, that they feel as though maybe they've been kind of denigrated for English culture, English way of life, that they feel as though that they have been, kind of put second in their own country, as it were. Mm-hmm. But that I can completely understand. I think it's also a reaction fundamentally. Again, when things like this happen, I do think that people need to have a look at why do people feel the need to do this, right? Mm-hmm. So in some areas, the answer to that question is really straightforward. Mm-hmm. You have just plonked 600 unknown blokes from the Middle East and North Africa or whatever in a British market town in the countryside, and this is and then you've told everyone who was opposed to that they were a racist, and then something bad has happened, and this is a response to it. So for all of that stuff, I think it's perfectly understandable. I am also broadly speaking, of the view that if you are intimidated by the flag of whatever country it is that you're in, then maybe you need to have a little look at yourself. That said, look, it's the same with any. I mean, I didn't particularly like it, and I don't particularly like it when I've gone to parts of Birmingham. I was there to cover the bin strike, actually, which I think is still happening. But anyway, I was there to cover the bin strike, and I was sorry, and I was down, walking down streets there, and you just see from every single lamppost, the Palestine flag, there was the Lebanese flag. There's all these different flags that were there. None of them, of course, were English or British. No one really seems to have much of a problem with that. Mm-hmm. And there are people for whom all of those flags will have devastating connotations to them, and that they will think that there are racist connotations to some of those flags and all of that. So I think we need to look at it. We need to look at it in the round. I mean, look, I don't think anyone should be forced to have the British flag hung. If they don't like it, then that's obviously a question for them. I would raise questions about, well, why don't you like the English flag and things? And I think there's a lot of people. I don't have a huge amount of sympathy for a lot of the kind of middle class, lovey liberal elite who I think are broadly untouched by a lot of the societal issues that we have in this country at the moment and have been for a very long period of time, and have what people might call luxury beliefs about things. I don't have a huge amount of sympathy for them when they complain about something, because I actually think that they've largely had it their own way in this country for a long period of time, and I don't think this country's the better for it. And I also think that they are very, very snobby in a lot of their views and look down on people who have different views. I think they're all a little bit thick. So if they say things like, "Oh, I didn't really like this flag in this area," then actually I just don't really care about those people. But look, I don't think anyone should be forced, to have an unbearable existence where anything is forced on them for things. Yeah.
All right. Well, Patrick Christys, thank you very much, mate. Absolute pleasure having you on.
That was all right. I enjoyed it.
It's 5 out of 10. Yeah. not the best one I've had, but it'll do.
All right, good. All right. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed
coming in, man. You can catch Patrick Monday to Friday at 9 p.m. on GB News, and maybe occasionally on here again in the future. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.